just watched XX, and I have to say one of the first things I noticed that I really liked about it was the stop motion intro that turned into a wraparound. I thought that was very well done. What I'm going to do is talk about each of the segments individually rather than the film as a whole at first. The first story is called The Box, and if you saw the trailer, you saw that there's a scene with a family that's on a subway train and a gentleman sitting there with a gift box, and the little boy asks to see what's in the box, and the gentleman obliges him, and then some odd things happen thereafter. This story was actually pretty engaging. I liked the direction that it was going in, but it really didn't have any closure to it. The acting was pretty good, the direction was pretty good. I just felt the story just was left unfinished. I felt unsatisfied by that. There was one pet peeve I had, and that's when the daughter banged her fork on the plate to indicate that she wanted more food. I thought that was so rude. My mother would never. No. 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 I'm sorry. Ever since I seen Get Out, that's gonna be a running thing with me. I also wondered if naming the little boy Danny in this particular segment was an homage to The Shining. It could have been. There was some really good practical effects used in this segment, especially at a dinner scene, but overall it was C+, I would say. The second segment is called The Birthday Party, and I don't know which bugged me more, the bad acting or the worst wigs. This segment was just, I really hate to speak badly of short films, especially if it's from an independent director. I really want to give all the credit in the world, but this one, I'm trying to find something positive to say about it. The color scheme was lovely, and the costume designer worked their ass off, but I really didn't get the whole bad wig thing. There was several characters with bad wigs. Even one character was a guy, and he had a bad wig on. I didn't understand the purpose of that, other than just to be distracting, but you know your story is lackluster when I'm paying more attention to what's on your characters' heads than what your characters are actually doing. I hate to say it, but this story just was whack. The third segment was called Don't Fall. I think out of all 4 segments, this is my favorite segment. It's about 4 people, and they go hiding in a place that may or may not be off limits to the public, and they either desecrate or disturb something there, and some other stuff happens. Even though the characters were a little bit aggravating, I liked the direction of this. I liked the practical effects. It really reminded me of an episode of Masters of Horror. I started to say Tales from the Crypt, but no, it's more of a Masters of Horror. It almost reminded me of an episode that would have came right in between Dear Woman and Jennifer. It really had that Masters of Horror feel to it. I actually watched this movie during the daytime, so it was only slightly creepy, but I know had I seen this segment at night, it would have been way creepier. It probably would have kept me up. It was a pretty good segment. The last segment was called Her Only Living Son. The story was semi-interesting, but it's been done to death. It's been done so many times. It's no longer interesting unless you're going to put a new twist on it. It just wasn't interesting. The only thing that stood out to me about that whole segment was that the mom, Cora, something about her kind of reminded me of the mother from the Babadook. I can't put my finger on what that something is, but something about her reminded me of that. Maybe it was her reaction to impending doom, or her sense of impending doom. That's the closest thing I can think of to why she reminded me of the mother from the Babadook. As I said in the beginning, the stop motion wraparound story was really, really cute. I liked it, but this whole thing was kind of lackluster. I feel like it being all female directors was more of a gimmick than anything else, because this really wasn't that great of an anthology. I hate to say it, but I have really high standards for anthology series anyway. I mean, VHS I only halfway liked, ABC's of Death halfway liked. I feel like, not even halfway, I feel like every time I see one of these anthology series in current years, it's always been about a 25% positive for me. 25% of the short films are really, really good, and the rest are just, why are you here? You're just filler. And I feel like that's what makes them not so good, because there isn't an even level for the stories. Another issue with a lot of these is that the short stories they tell don't have good payoffs, and when you put them together as an anthology, there's a really inconsistent quality amongst the story. And one of my favorite anthologies, well, not one of my absolute favorite anthology, has been Creepshow. Although I know that's not a fair comparison, because with Creepshow, every segment was written by Stephen King and they were all directed by George A. Romero. So it's a little bit different, and that's why there is a consistency there, because you have the same director and the same writer. But I don't see why these newer anthologies couldn't take just the level of sophistication from Creepshow and make sure that there's a consistent level with these stories. Like, why do you have an excellent story, then a crappy story, then an excellent story, then a crappy story, then an excellent story, then a so-so story, then a boring story. Like, there's got to be some level, some measure of quality, and then you'll have a really good anthology series. If you have some level of quality amongst all of your short stories or your short films, then you make a really good anthology. I don't think that's impossible. Even with multiple directors, I don't think that's impossible. Anyways, I was really disappointed with XX. I was excited about it when I saw the trailer. The trailer made it look really, really good, but then watching it was a real letdown, unfortunately. It wasn't absolutely horrible, but it wasn't good either. While we're on anthologies, I got to take a look at Galaxy of Horrors, which, again, the trailer looked really good to me and I was excited to see it. So hopefully this one goes better than XX went. I like the opening, the wraparound with Mr. Brown, who is trapped in this chamber and he's kind of paralyzed and he's forced to watch all these short movies. I kind of like that. I liked his reaction. I like that it was just long enough to give you a wraparound story, but not overly long and drawn out. As we saw in VHS Viral, I hated the wraparound for that one. That was horrible. The first story is called Eden, and it takes place in a post-apocalyptic US where there's an issue with air quality, and there's a group of, I would say, freedom fighters, militants, whatever you would call them, that are fighting against the government. And the story was pretty interesting. I like how the kind of hero of the story was a child, and it resonated with me, especially with the air quality thing, considering currently in the US our administration doesn't seem to care too much about our air or water quality, and we still have cities here that have contaminated water that children are drinking and getting sick from. So that part of the story really resonated with me as both a science fiction element and a political commentary. The second story was called Iris, and Iris was basically Siri. Iris is Siri spelled backwards, but Iris was an app on this dude's phone and he's doing some messed up stuff and it comes back around to bite him in the ass. That's all I can tell you about that without spoiling it. It was a decent short story or short film. I liked it. Story 3 was called The Flesh Computer. It was very gritty and kind of gross looking. Some of the way it's shot, I don't know why it reminded me of Dune, but it just reminded me of Dune. And the villains in it were really, really messed up, and you are happy to see them get their comeuppance. It's hard to talk about these without telling you all the details, but suffice it to say, this was also another really good entry. Really was a cool story about consciousness and artificial intelligence and where the two meet. The fourth story is called Pathos, and this one was heavily featured in a trailer where you saw the gentleman that had this corkscrew type thing in his head, and it kind of gave me anxiety. It was just ratcheting up tension. This one was in Italian. You just really feel for the character in the situation, and you feel like you're in his shoes. The way that they shot it, it was just tense. The whole thing is tense. The fifth one is called Eveless, and it's the shortest and very to the point short film. I actually kind of liked it. It gave you what you needed to have, basically. It's hard. I'm trying not to spoil this. I might have to do a spoiler review, but I'll just say that Eveless, I think it couldn't have been longer than 3 or 4 minutes long, but it was direct to the point. The acting was good. The short story that it told was good. I liked it. Story 6 was called They Will All Die in Space. Out of all the stories, I think this was probably my least favorite. Not that it was bad, just out of all the rest, this one was the least engaging to me. I was kind of underwhelmed by the set design because it takes place in space, and I'm really tired of not every, but we'll just say 99.9% of movies that take place in space, the set looks like Alien, and I feel like there's got to be other spaceship designs besides just metal corridors with lights and wires and tubes. I'm just tired of that. I don't know, maybe it's because I watched, my mother raised me watching Star Trek and Dune and all this other, there was, back in the day, I feel like there was a lot more variety in how spacecrafts look. Like, if you think about it, when you look at Star Trek, that spaceship, or the different spaceships within the Star Trek universe, including, the Klingon ships versus the Enterprise and all that didn't look anything like the ships in Dune, and those didn't look anything like the ships in Star Wars, and those didn't look anything like, let me think, Battlestar Galactica. There was a lot of variation in how spaceships looked. Now we keep getting the same retread of the corridors from Aliens, and I'm getting tired of it. Story number 7 is called Entity, and it was about as nerve-wracking as Pathos. If I was in the position or the predicament of the main character that is in Entity, I would be flipping out. I'd be having not just an anxiety attack, I'd be having a panic attack. I would be having a freaking meltdown. It was, would I be spoiling it if I said it was similar to the premise of Gravity, but way worse? The acting was really good because the young lady had to pretty much only use her face to act and only use her face to show her reactions to what's happening around her. And I mean, she really deserves a lot of credit for what she did there. Story 8 was called Kings, and it's a German story. It kind of reminded me of movies like Blade 2 or From Dusk Till Dawn, where you have a group of humans fighting non-human type entities. And out of all the stories, this is the one that I felt like really could have been fleshed out and made into a full-length feature film, and I would watch it. The only thing that I would change is that I would make the creatures practical instead of CGI, but if you've watched my videos, you already know that I am a big fan of practical effects work. CGI is not horrible, it's just if you don't have the money and the resources, you really should skip it, because there's a difference between what we see in something like Ghost Shark and what we see in Jurassic World. So, you know, if you like science fiction, this is definitely worth a watch. I actually like these so much, I probably will buy this on Blu-ray and give it to my mother on Mother's Day because she really loves sci-fi. That's how I got into science fiction mostly. My mother got me into science fiction. I grew up watching Star Trek with her. She took me to see Dune when I was 7 years old. She got me into this show called Red Dwarf. I don't know if you know about it because it's an old British sci-fi comedy show. My dad's kind of into sci-fi too, but he likes more sci-fi fantasy like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and Doctor Who. Him and my brother are huge Doctor Who fans. I can never get into Doctor Who so much, but they love Doctor Who. And before anybody misinterprets what I just said, I was not trying to diss Star Wars in favor of Star Trek. I just see Star Wars as more fantasy than science fiction because there isn't a whole lot of science involved in Star Wars, if you think about it, but that's just my opinion. Oh, and I forgot Flash Gordon. My dad took us to see Flash Gordon back in the day when I was in, gosh, would I've been in kindergarten? All I know is I went to go see Flash Gordon. I didn't know what the heck it was. He said that there used to be an old Flash Gordon that you could probably look up on YouTube, black and white, that he used to watch when he was a kid. So when Flash Gordon was remade in the 80s, he was excited to take us to go see that. So speaking of which, are you a sci-fi fan? And when did you become a sci-fi fan? What did you see when you were a little kid that made you really get into sci-fi? For me, I would probably say it was Dune. Although, like I said, grew up on Star Wars and Star Trek, they didn't connect with me as much as something like Dune. Can't explain why, I guess it's just a thing.